Well, hello and welcome to News Center. I'm Ashmit Kumar. Now, there have been a major slew of matters that have come up with respect to the battle that is currently underway in the IT sector. Now, there have been concerns raised. As per report by Money Control, Infosys has written to Cognizant accusing it of unethical poaching practices. Sources, meanwhile, from Infosys have said that the communication to Cognizant was more a deterrent. Remember, Infosys veterans Ravi Kumar took charge as Cognizant CEO at the start of this year. Now, since his appointment, Cognizant has hired several senior vice presidents and executive vice presidents, mostly from Wipro and Infosys. In the last 12 months, Infosys has witnessed the exit of 7 to 8 top executives, while Wipro has seen 10 exits during the same period. Now, just recently, Wipro also filed a suit. Two of its former executives in the line of fire who joined Cognizant. This includes its former chief financial officer, Jatin Dalal. In the IT space, there have been more legal battles in the past as well. Accenture sued Wipro's Stephanie Troutman for breaching a non-compete clause in 2022. Infosys, meanwhile, also filed an arbitration case against former CFO Rajiv Bansal over his severance pay, which it eventually lost in 2021. And well, to take us through these legal questions and legal implications of this entire issue, we are now joined by Mr. P.V. Murthy, Head of Labour Practice at the Economic Laws Practice, as well as Smriti Tiwari, Partner at Khaitan Legal Associates. Mr. Murthy, I'll come to you first. Before we dive into the details, let's first clear the slate that as far as details, specifics of this specific battle is concerned, those details are not publicly available. So let's make that very clear at the very outset. But nonetheless, when this issue comes up, when such issues come up, specifically on the issue of non-compete clause, for the benefit of our viewers, share some clarity on what the legal status is and how the Indian courts have decided and ruled on this particular issue in the past.
Yeah. First of all, thank you very much, Ashmit, for having me here. I think that, this is a very important discussion. As you have outlined as to whatever is happening in the industry, specifically in IT sector, there have been a few cases where the talent has moved from one organization to another organization, and the organizations where the talent has left, they have been writing to the other organization or taking the employees to the court. The latest being just in Mr. Dalal, wherein Wipro has filed a civil suit against him when he left and joined Cognizant. To answer your question specifically, the non-compete clauses, see, it's like this. Organizations have not been very specific about the employment contracts. There have been several contracts, the employment contracts being very generic in nature. Non-compete clause is present in every employment contract in one way or other. To what extent can the organizations withhold the employees basis the non-compete clause is a big question mark before the courts of law. And time and again, the courts have held that some of these clauses were not really binding on the employees because of the fundamental right which an employee has got. Article 19(1)(g) provides anybody to practice any trade profession, and retaining a person with a generic clause of non-compete is often very difficult. This is what the courts have held. So we can discuss more about it, but in the interest of time, I'm handing it over back to you.
Right, Mr. Murthy. Let me take that same question across to Ms. Tiwari. Ms. Tiwari, non-compete clause, how have the courts looked upon it? We have come across a few judgments from the Supreme Court as well as the High Courts which say that such negative covenants cannot survive beyond the duration of the contract itself. In simpler words, can you break it down for us? Non-compete clause, how have Indian courts looked at this provision?
So, Ashmit, I'll dive right straight into it. So courts, in my view, have been pretty clear so far. Like you mentioned, the Apex Court right down to several high courts. Non-compete post-termination, we generally do not see in enforcement. The reason is what Mr. Murthy also mentioned, that because as a restraint in trade, So contractually speaking, you cannot have a clause which post termination of a contract restrains a person from joining competing business. So therefore, if you were to go against an employee post his termination and seek an injunction, that would not be granted in Indian courts as the law stands today. And I think it's actually been quite clear for quite a few years.
Understand. Mr. Murthy, let me now then raise the question to you that the issue that has been flagged by Infosys in its letter to Cognizant as well as by Wipro in its suits both in the US and in India is the question of unethical poaching. The question I then want to ask is, given the lack of enforceability of a non-compete clause, what happens to unethical poaching? Is unethical poaching legal? That's the question.
Yeah, no, that's a very difficult question. It raises the question as to, what is unethical poaching? It is not unethical poaching. It's an employee leaving an organization and taking up another employment. That would be the simple answer. So it needs to be defined as to, what is that unethical poaching, number one. Second is, like you said at the beginning, we do not have full facts. We have not seen the employment contract issued by Wipro to Mr. Dalal. What I would suggest is that, organizations need to be very specific. The specificity of these clauses but determines as to, how the organizations can proceed against the employees. And also, the clarity as to, bringing in more clarity into the employment contracts. Like I was saying earlier, many times, the contracts are pretty generic, very generic in terms of these clauses. It's a sort of a cut paste, if I can use those words, cut paste of those clauses from one employment contract to another employment contract. This is where, the specificity, clarity, and also, the specific performance. In this particular case, Mr. Dalal, what I understood from the newspapers is that he is asking the court to move the matter into arbitration. So this is where, I think that, bringing in more clarity, specificity, and specific performance into the contracts is what I would recommend to the employers.
Sure. Well, this is absolutely, as you pointed out, this is a private suit. We're not privy to those details. So that, of course, begs a big question mark. But nonetheless, we're still trying to take this discussion forward. Ms. Tiwari, let me come to you now. And this time, specifically on the issue of how Indian courts have dealt with the matter. In the past, they've held in favor of Article 19(1)(g), which is the fundamental right to practice any profession. They've held in favor of livelihood over the interests of the corporates. Having said that, trying to flip the coin on its head, the question I want to ask is what happens in case of senior leadership figures? Senior leadership figures who are privy to sensitive information, who are privy to strategic decisions on operational details. Can the same benchmark be employed with respect to non-compete clause when it comes to senior leadership figures leaving the company and joining the competitor?
See, Ashwin, so there are two parts to the question that you asked. Essentially, first part is a non-compete where an employee leaves employment and then joins a competitor. That is one part of it. But the second part of it, which you pointed out, is very relevant, and that comes to protection of confidential information. Because often people in senior leadership are privy to information that's extremely confidential, extremely sensitive. And therefore, in these employment contracts, you'll often see a very tight clause which protects confidential information. And courts in India have also been very clear, even post-termination of employment, the clause which protects confidential information is a clause that can be enforced by courts. So again, without knowing the particular facts of this case, as we know, generally speaking, courts will pass injunctions refraining an employee from using any confidential information that they may have become privy to as part of their employment in the previous organization. So that's something that happens. And especially in contracts with some senior leaderships, you'll find that these clauses are often very tightly worded. They are very, very comprehensive. And again, it all ties in together. Even being unethically poached by another organization sort of ties in with whether you're using confidential information of the previous organization to cause gain to the subsequent one.
Right. Sure. Mr. Murthy, let me come back to you now. When we talk of such actions being contemplated by companies such as Wipro and Infosys, contemplating legal action, suits being filed in the US as well as here in India, is this more of a legal tactic to send a message to the entire rank and file of the company, or is it perhaps moving towards changing the Indian jurisprudence per se as far as the issue of non-compete clause is concerned?
Yeah, it could be both. It could be a bit of both, I would say. It is sending out a message to the erring employees, when there is a specific clause in the employment contract, and especially, like Ms. Tiwari has pointed out, when there is confidential information, the senior executives are privy to this information. And, when that is breached, I think that, the courts would like to, the employers would like to take specific action against those specific executives, and also, send out a message to the larger set of employees that are working for them. The second is that, it also could be perhaps to a much lesser extent to send out or, to invoke the law and bring a change as we move forward. That also could be the thing. But, I think that, the first one is the major reason for employers taking this decision.
Right. Right, Mr. Murthy. One final question to you, that in a sector such as the IT space, which sees very high attrition levels and movement of top talent from one company to the other, what would your recommendation be as a Via Media for this situation? Is a garden leave perhaps the need of the hour, where the host company, where the initial company, company A to company B, company A decides to pay the salary dues for the non-compete period to the employee in question? Is this the Via Media? Is this the answer that is perhaps needed to the IT sector issue?
See, I would say that, like I was earlier saying, that, bringing in more specificity, clarity into the employment contracts, wherever it is missing, it's some contracts are pretty tight, like Mr. Tiwari has already pointed out. But wherever those things are not really tight, the employers need to look at them. The second thing I would say is that employers coming together and, working out specificities so that, there is the tussle between the employers could be avoided. It is to what extent who would take the first step is a billion-dollar question. But, employers coming together, the IT sector coming together and trying to work out a solution rather than, poaching talent or, attracting talent.
Right, Mr. Murthy.
Yeah, that's what I would say.
Right, Mr. Murthy. So some uneasy questions there that the IT sector will have to confront going forward, especially the bellwether players in this space. But with that, I'd like to thank both of our panelists for joining us. And with that, we're slipping into a very short break. But coming up, shipping firms remain divided on returning to the Red Sea as Houthi rebels continue their attacks. That and more on the other side.
CNBC-TV18, embarking on a quarter century of